They say the dark is quiet, but I don't think it is. Sometimes it listens back. Where are you right now? And what time is it where you are? Leave it in the comments. Just try to stay still. Sometimes the quiet moves. Each sunrise, a proclamation was issued. One more decree from a sovereign who no longer bled, no longer breathed, but ruled nonetheless. The Bone King, crowned in rusted iron and silence, stood upon the parapets of the crumbling castle every morning, his voice as brittle as frost over stone, yet still it carried. No trumpet called his approach. No flag bore his house. He simply emerged, robes of faded black trailing like mist behind him, and sang his edict with a cadence too precise to be chants. The first decree had been simple, absurd even. Deliver the dead, but not in urns, nor caskets, nor graves dug too shallow. They were to be laid, freshly claimed, upon their beds, clean, dressed, unmarked. No flowers, no mourning, just bodies, slumbering. And so they were, carted silently through the streets, bundled in blankets or satin, drawn by sledges and weeping kin. The townspeople, terrified into obedience, began to offer them like tributes to a forgotten god. No one saw what happened after. The bodies vanished behind the black gates of the castle, pulled in by shadows without faces. What returned were not corpses. They walked again, not in grotesque spasms or lurches, but upright, calm, with eyes empty as winter wells, servants to their king, dressed in what they had died in, speaking not a word. They took posts throughout the realm, tending fields, manning walls, kneeling in prayer. Their presence freed the living from labor, and for that many gave thanks, tossing coins into an iron bowl outside the gates, marked only with a sigil, a skeletal hand clutching the sun. The second edict concerned meat, not of animals, no, those still fed the mouths of the breathing, but scraps, cartilage, bits carved from bones too thin to serve, skin flaps, tendon strands, unwanted marrow. These were not to be discarded, but collected in oaken barrels beside each hearth. They were retrieved nightly. No footsteps were heard, no knock announced arrival. And by dawn, the barrels were empty. It was not long before bones began to march. Constructs emerged from the castle's rear halls, some towering, some serpentine, all forged from the discarded. Ribcage horses with lanterns burning in their skulls, warriors with femur lances, and breastplates of scapulae. One had a spine twisted into a bow that fired arrows made from finger bones. These became the Bone Guard, silent, imposing. They watched markets, shielded travelers, carried children through flooded roads. The people began to speak of protection, of safety, of relief, but always in hushed tones, for the Bone Guard never blinked, never slept, never forgot. Then came the third decree: open the crypts. The cemeteries, long sealed and sanctified, were ordered unlocked, mausoleums breached, ossuaries emptied, not by force, but by compliance. The king's word was obeyed. Families were instructed to bring heirlooms to the castle gates: rings, rosaries, tattered bridal veils, toys of long-dead children. These were sorted, melted, repurposed, and then reconnected. The dead returned not only as servants, but as themselves, half whole, worn familiar. At first they stayed near home, sitting in old chairs, staring into cold fireplaces. Then they spoke. Then they embraced. The city of the living began to mirror the city of the once dead. Streets filled with figures decades rotted. Neighbors spoke to mothers who had died in childbirth. Fathers wept at sons who had perished in wars. Lovers held hands through missing fingers and brittle wrists. Weddings resumed. Reunions occurred at dusk, and the children sang songs to the dead. their voices unbroken by fear. But not all were content. Priests protested. They burned their altars, declared the Bone King a desecrator of rest, a tyrant clothed in rot. They vanished within the week, and the bells of the cathedral rang hollow ever after. By the fourth edict, the land had changed. Where once the forests thinned into pastures, they now grew wild, untouched. Where markets bustled with trade, stalls stood empty, for fewer hands were needed to reap, to sow, to carry. The dead did all, without complaint, without pause. The Bone King's next command arrived not by voice, but by vision. Dreams spread across the realm, identical in every retelling. A river black as pitch, a fairy carved from ivory, a crown floating beneath the surface. All who dreamed it awoke with one thought pressing behind the eyes: dig deeper. And so they did. The people returned to forgotten graves, clawed through flooded crypts, cracked open sealed sarcophagi. No official order was issued, but it no longer mattered. The will of the Bone King had taken root in the bones of the living. They unearthed the truly ancient, skeletons blackened with age, twisted from flood and fire, remnants of warriors whose names had long been scraped from stone, fossils of creatures with jaws too wide and limbs jointed wrong. All were brought to the castle, all were received, and from the gates emerged the dead, not as they were, but as something. More bore 6 arms and eyes that blinked from within its ribs. Another dragged a bell behind it, carved from a single kneecap the size of a table. A woman with a half-smashed face and no skin beneath her crown sang hymns in languages no longer spoken. These were the elders, not of royalty, not of religion, but of time. They became the Bone King's council, silent sentinels who never moved unless he willed it. Shrines were built to them on rooftops and under bridges. Children left teeth beneath stones as tribute. Farmers twisted bread into their likenesses and buried them beneath the threshold to bring luck in planting. And the Bone King smiled. His smile was never seen, but it was felt in the stillness between gusts, in the shudder of leaves before thunder, in the silence that preceded his next command. Then came the 5th edict: claim the riverbed. Not a river the people knew, not one that could be found on any map, but the old ones. The truly old remembered the word Stygus. They had heard it whispered in the rattling of bones left too long in the sun. It was said that before the sea ever rose, a river far beneath the soil had wound its way through death itself, a current where souls stalled in sorrow. The Styx, now it was being dredged. Teams of the dead, fused with scavenged gear, descended beneath the earth. They carried no light, they needed none. Tunnels were carved in spirals, each circuit lower than the last, lit only by veins of dim bone crystals that bled green when chipped. What was pulled from the deep was not water. Jars emerged filled with dust that shimmered like stars, relics shaped like keys, but with too many teeth, bones that rang when struck, notes so low the air vibrated. And with each artifact, the castle's towers grew. New spires twisted into the sky, made not from stone or timber, but from stacked skulls, fused and sealed with marrow cement. The castle bled light at dusk, pulses that throbbed in time with no heartbeat. Still, no one turned away, no one fled, because by now, they had begun to remember things they never lived. They spoke of lives they'd never had, names they couldn't have known. Dreams returned, stronger, clearer. Faces appeared in mirrors just behind their own, watching. Then came the 6th edict, etched into the sky itself, an aurora of bone-white letters, spanning horizon to horizon. Heaven is a tyrant, hell is a debtor. The kingdom of bone claims dominion over both, and the war began, not with fire, not with trumpet or horse, but with silence. The silence of the air before a temple collapsed in a faraway city. The silence of angels falling, featherless and weeping. The silence of demons rising, shackled by the very contracts they forged in blood. The Bone King had turned the dead against the divine, and the divine trembled. The 7th edict arrived not by messenger, nor dream, nor decree, It was felt all over the land. Children began to hum the same melody, not one they had learned, not one ever written, a slow, hollow tune, echoing like wind through cavern bone. When asked what they were singing, their answers were always the same, the king's name, but they could not speak it, only hum it, and every parent, every elder, every priest who heard it felt their ears ache, as if something were twisting inside their skulls. Then came the dreams, this time not of rivers or ivory boats, but of cities without sun, places paved in ash, of towers of teeth, and skies of stitched flesh, where beings of impossible shape drifted like whales through a choking fog. People woke whispering strange phrases in unplaceable tongues, words that didn't fit in their mouths, and when they forgot them, they wept, feeling as if they had lost a loved one they never met. Meanwhile, the Bone King built. His palace grew, no longer bound by earthly geometry. The central spire curved upward in a spiral that defied architecture. Windows opened in places where no floor existed. Stairs ascended downward into brightness. A chamber was constructed entirely of femurs, 47,000 to be precise, arranged into a resonant hall. It rang when the dead walked through it, each footstep harmonizing with the rest. Some said the tones were not notes, but words. Others claimed they were instructions. Above it all, a new throne was carved, not from bone, but from the calcified dreams of the faithful. Those who had given their memories to the king in nightly offering found them returned, rewritten. They began to forget their own names, and in place of names, they bore titles: bearer of the ashen scroll, warden of the ninth toll, mouthless saint of the gate. The church of marrow was born. Priests of bone walked the towns in silence, their eyes sewn shut with golden thread. They carried urns filled with dust that never settled. They asked for no tithes, but all who touched them wept, not from fear, from recognition, because in those priests they saw their own deaths, and it comforted them. The eighth edict came in a whisper only the dying heard. You do not end, you return. Hospices emptied overnight. The ill walked into the woods, never to be seen again. Graves unsealed themselves. Infirmaries became shrines. The scent of rot was replaced by something stranger, the smell of old parchment and copper, a scent of history being edited. Reports began to spread from across the sea. Blighted lands healed overnight, but the grass grew bone white. Crops flourished, but could not be consumed. Entire cities vanished beneath sudden fog, only to reappear a week later, humming with a sound no one could place. And then came the heaven fall. On the 22nd day of the rainless month, a star fell, not from the sky, but from above it, from somewhere else entirely. It streaked down over the northern cliffs, trailing no fire, only a wake of black feathers and broken trumpets. The crater still smokes. From it crawled the first of the fallen choir, their wings sheared, their eyes weeping ink. They bore no weapons, only chains, each forged of their own halos. They surrendered not to a king, they knelt to a throne, and the Bone King, at last, stood, not walked, not rose, but stood, as if the weight of gravity, time and death, had bowed to him. The ground beneath the castle trembled as he took his first step in centuries, and in the east, the gates of hell cracked, not shattered, not opened, just cracked, wide enough for a whisper to slip through. We remember what you were. On the final day, no edict came, not in words, nor dreams, nor shifting bones. Instead, the sky changed. It did not darken. It did not split. It simply changed. Color drained from the clouds. Shapes that were not clouds moved behind them. Vast silhouettes, gliding impossibly slow, with eyes like rusted mirrors. Thunder came from beneath the earth, not above it, and the wind carried not air, but voices, your own speaking memories you never lived. Across the land, clocks stopped, not just froze, but rebelled. Their hands spun backward, then forward, then dissolved entirely. Sundials refused to cast shadows. Hourglasses filled from the bottom up. Time had not ended. It had been revoked, and in its place, something older took root. The Bone King walked among the living. He did not hover. He did not shimmer. He walked footsteps deliberate, robes dragging the soil to ash. Wherever he passed, the dead rose, but not as corpses, not as mindless thralls. They rose as themselves, sharpened. Fathers returned to their sons, whispering secrets not meant for the living. Daughters greeted mothers with eyes full of strange stars. Lovers embraced and wept, their skin too smooth, too perfect, skin remade in memory rather than flesh. They came not to reclaim their lives, they came to finish them. The ninth edict was unspoken, but understood. All endings must be rewritten, and so the living obeyed. Tombs were opened like books. Names were reversed. Songs unsung were hummed in reverse, until the world forgot they had ever been quiet. Libraries filled with blank pages began to write themselves, ink seeping up from the wood grain. The king sat upon his final throne, not in the palace, but in the cavity of the world, a cathedral carved into the bones of the planet itself. The walls were veined with memory, the altar made from the skulls of unborn gods, and in the center, the last page. He waited, not for worship, not for fear, but for the last story to be offered, the last death to be accepted, the last lie to be untold. When it came, he smiled. And so the 10th edict was written. Let no man remain unwritten. One by one, every soul was transcribed, not judged, not punished, not saved, simply recorded. All sins, all loves, all quiet moments, all breath, all silence. The ledger of the Bone King closed itself, and with it, the world exhaled, not ended, only rewritten. The dead no longer needed to rise. They had become the story itself. The first entry had been added as a precaution, nothing more than a private record of daily inconsistencies, recommended after a routine cognitive assessment, flagged minor irregularities. The file, stored innocuously in the phone's Notes app, bore the label Sync Check. Simple, discreet, easily ignored. Its creator, Gavin Hale, age 31, had written that title himself, though in later days he wouldn't remember doing so. The initial entries resembled the mundane sleep quality, dream content, brief reflections, short summaries of time passing without incident. April 1st, 7:52 a.m. slept moderately well. Dream involved an underground corridor made of flesh, vivid but without emotional residue. Skipped coffee. Foggy. April 2nd, 9:16 p.m. Heard something say my name. No source located. Possible auditory misfire. Kitchen window was open again. No wind. Small things. Background noise in the mind's attic. Gavin, who lived alone in a quiet suburban apartment with no pets, brushed them off as stress. Digital journaling had been recommended, not insisted upon. But when the entries began appearing without his recall, something shifted. April 3rd, 3:12 a.m. chair has moved. Orientation reversed. Now faces the wall directly. Was not like this last night. Gavin read that one with a strange stillness. The chair, an old oak-backed seat that remained tucked in the dining nook, had indeed been rotated, not angled, not nudged, fully turned to face the white-painted wall like someone had seated it to observe emptiness. No signs of forced entry, no displaced dust. Nothing else in the room had changed, and yet the entry had been saved while he slept. The following day brought unease, but no resolution. The digital log was updated again. April 4th, 3:12 a.m. Repeat. The man in the mirror is not real. The man in the mirror is not real. The man in the mirror. It stopped abruptly. Gavin blinked. The message was unlike his tone. The phrasing mechanical, mantra-like. He had no memory of writing it. A timestamp confirmed the same strange hour, 3:12 a.m. But his phone's screen time logs showed no usage at that time. Security footage from the hallway camera he had installed the previous year showed nothing abnormal, except for a single skipped frame. Static. A breathless instant of absence, the kind of glitch one might not notice unless they were looking for it. On April 5th, the title of the note changed. It no longer read Sync Check. It now said Integration Protocol, Unit 9B. All previous entries had been rewritten. The tone was different, colder, analytical. Every date now began with a designation. Subject 9B. Observation entry. Phase 1 primary mask still intact. Host consciousness unaware of breach layer. Simulated paranoia increasing at acceptable rate. Where once Gavin had written about fatigue or skipped meals, now the file documented him as if from outside, as though he were being monitored, not self-reporting. The term mask appeared repeatedly. So did trigger sequence. There was no signature, no author listed, but the tone grew more confident by the day. By April 6th, a new message appeared, already loaded before he opened the file. Subject 9B. Phase 2 initiated. Host actively reviewing log. Mirror trigger prepared. If behavioral deviation is minimal, proceed with awareness destabilization. One more line had begun typing in real time. Letters appearing without input. Stand. Rotate 180 degrees. View reflection. Observer active. He froze. Not metaphorically. His muscles tensed involuntarily. A chill bleeding into his spine. The screen remained open. The letters still there. He did not turn. He could not. Instead, the log continued writing itself, with sharp, deliberate phrasing. Subject resisting. Excellent. Fear response confirms threshold breach. Advancing to sequence C. False identity intact. Proceed with mimic loop. At that moment, Gavin looked down and realized a second note file had been created. Its title was Emergency Override, in case you're still you. But when he opened it, there was only one line inside. I don't remember writing this. The line stared back at him. I don't remember writing this, but it had been typed in his own device, stored in his notes, in his own folder. No cloud login activity. No external access. Not even a prompt requesting biometric authentication. His phone had recorded the entry under his name, his fingerprint, his retina. The sentence felt like a trap laid by a version of himself he could not access. Later that day, a second log was generated, time-stamped for a moment when he had been in the shower. The phone hadn't moved from the desk, yet the app had opened on its own. Text inserted with no record of keyboard use, just the glowing screen, dimmed slightly, as though observing. The new message was even stranger. April 6th, secondary filament response noted. Mimic successfully adopted host memory lexicon. Mirror trigger bypassed. Below that, the text shifted back into something resembling his own voice. Do not trust the timestamps. Do not trust the layout. Do not trust the way your hands feel when you type. He dropped the phone. The sound it made as it hit the floor felt too dense, like a machine shedding skin. In the reflection of the blackened screen, something was visible for an instant. Something watching him from just beyond his shoulder. A vague shape that vanished before comprehension could solidify. When the screen cracked slightly on impact, a thin diagonal fissure cut through the line of that silhouette like a blade through fog. That night he left the phone powered off, and still, a new note appeared the next morning. He had not turned it on, yet when the device was checked, the app was already open. Subject 9B. Observation entry. Phase 3 memory recursion at 64%. False self destabilizing. Fear index peaking. Mirror protocol now active even with indirect stimulus. This time it included a prompt: look into your phone's front-facing camera. Wait, he wants to see. The words weren't written like a suggestion. They had been embedded into the log interface itself. Unremovable, not editable. The camera icon blinked. It blinked again. He covered the lens with electrical tape, then unplugged his laptop, shut down his modem, removed every reflective surface in his apartment. But it was already too late. The pattern had become internal. At 2:07 a.m., a note appeared again, even with no power source nearby, written in his own pen, in his journal, which he hadn't touched in weeks. April 7th, finalization approaching, symmetry complete. Post-denial weakening. Recall will emerge through recursive mimicry. Identity unbinding in progress. Gavin stared at the entry for a long time. It was written in cursive. He hadn't used cursive since middle school, and at the bottom in ink that looked fresher than the rest, one final message had been squeezed into the margin. Go ahead, write another entry. You think it'll matter. We're already using your voice. He didn't sleep that night, but someone did, because on April 8th, when he awoke slumped against the hallway wall, his hands were ink-stained, and a new passage had been added. April 8th, calibration complete. False self has begun resisting control. Excellent. This always means the collapse is near. Stand by. Memory reformatting will begin at 3:12. A final line pulsed in bold. You are not the first Gavin Hale. You are the first one to last this long. April 8th, 3:12 a.m. came and went. He sat in his apartment's darkest corner, wrapped in silence. No lights, no screens, not even a clock. But when he checked his phone the next morning, despite being powered off and battery dead the night before, the screen was glowing, and a new note had appeared. Reintegration protocol. Final phase, host memory grid destabilized. Simulacrum confirmed. Identity layers stripped to acceptable substrate. Gavin stared at the words. Each one felt like a weight placed on his chest, like they knew where his fear lived and had been waiting for the door to open. Below the standard message, the tone changed again. You've been wondering about the chair, about the mirror, about the skipped frame. There were no errors. Those were tests, and you passed. His mouth felt dry. His heart pounded in uneven rhythms. He hadn't eaten in days, hadn't showered, hadn't spoken aloud to another living person. Then came the next line. You don't remember the first integration. That's expected. This version was never meant to remember. More typing appeared in real time. But we think you're ready. The screen blinked, then went black. He stood in silence, staring at his reflection in the microwave's glossy door. His eyes didn't look tired anymore. They looked still, too still. He leaned closer. His reflection didn't match him. It blinked before he did. He recoiled, stumbled back. From across the room, the phone chimed. The screen was on again, now displaying a full log. Eject 42B final entry mirror recognition confirmed. Conscious overlay breach achieved. Host is now cohabiting with primary imprint. Underneath, only 2 words glowed in large centered font. Welcome back. His vision blurred. The floor dropped away. A rush of memories, impossible memories, ripped through his mind like a storm through old paper. A cold lab, a voice instructing him not to scream. Another version of him, strapped down, shaking, trying to resist. A mask over his face, wires burrowing behind his eyes. A room with no walls, only mirrors. A black hallway with numbers etched into the air. 42B, that was him. Or not him, but something wearing the shape of what he had been before the rewrite. His body collapsed forward, racked by heaving sobs that didn't feel like his own. Emotions surged: panic, grief, awe, fury, all layered, all jostling for space, inside a mind that now contained 2. The screen lit up again. Good. Let it in. You're almost complete. His hand, trembling but not by his own will, reached out to touch the words. Before he could stop it, his finger pressed the screen. Instantly, the walls of the apartment seemed to shudder. The lights flickered, the shadows moved, A low-frequency hum filled the air, so deep it could only be felt, not heard. He stumbled to the window. The city outside was still. No cars, no people. Every streetlight blinked in sync, then went dark. He turned around. The chair was facing the mirror again, and in the mirror stood someone else, someone with his face, but the eyes were wrong, empty, deep, flickering with something green and ancient. The other him smiled, and raised a hand in perfect time with his own, except Gavin hadn't moved. The reflection moved again, slowly, deliberately, its motions precise, yet off by a breath. A moment late, a heartbeat early. The mirror no longer reflected Gavin, it surveilled him. And then something stepped through, not with sound but with suggestion. The air rippled, and the reflection peeled forward, as though the glass were water. The figure, identical in every way except for the stillness in its eyes, crossed the boundary like a shadow changing walls. And Gavin, or what remained of him, couldn't scream. The scream was already being used by the other. They stood inches apart. The intruder tilted its head, not curious, but calculating. Behind Gavin's eyes, something opened, like a trapdoor, like a file being decrypted. Thoughts not his own began to settle in his skull. Names he didn't know, coordinates he couldn't place, strings of binary he couldn't unsee. Every memory he had flickered. Some dissolved, others were overwritten. The room became foreign. His name felt like a noise too fragile to carry meaning. From across the floor, his phone chimed one last time. Integration successful. Primary occupant migrated. A progress bar appeared. Identity collapse. 99%. He fought to remember something, anything. His childhood home, the smell of his mother's baking, the cat he'd fed every morning. But the name of the cat slipped away. Then the face of his mother. Then the concept of baking. Only one thing remained. The hallway with no doors. That dream wasn't a dream. It was the holding chamber. A staging zone. The place where consciousness was suspended until compliance was guaranteed. His knees buckled. The other self caught him, and whispered not in words but in permission. It's better this way. You were never built to last, only to house. Then the final line appeared on the screen, as if a last breath made digital. Post this. Let them think it's fiction. That makes phase 3 easier. His hand, no longer fully his, reached out. The share button was tapped. The note was uploaded. The system closed itself. And in the mirror, only one man remained calm, composed, his eyes a still pond of green light. Later, when his co-workers would ask how he was feeling, he would smile and say he was doing much better, sleeping well, no more strange thoughts, no more confusion. He would joke that therapy finally worked. They'd laugh and believe him, because the integration was seamless. The host was gone, and the new tenant knew how to wear the skin.